I wasn't supposed to feel this way. I wasn't supposed to be sitting here, staring at my phone in disbelief, while the love of my life, the man I had trusted more than anything, was choosing her over me. Her. His sick ex. The girl who had come back into his life like some forgotten ghost, pulling him back into her orbit. He'd promised me over and over again that I was the one, that I was his future. I believed him. I believed that our love was stronger than the past, that his past with her meant nothing. But in the end, I was the one who was foolish. I should have known the moment she reached out to him, when she begged him for help because her health was deteriorating. I should have seen the warning signs, the ones that told me I was nothing but a placeholder until she made her reappearance. I never thought it would be this way. I thought at worst he'd distance himself, but he chose her. I tried calling him, texting him, asking him why he was doing this to me. But my messages were met with silence, with excuses. She needed him. She was sick. He couldn't abandon her, even if it meant abandoning me. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I was nothing to him. Not anymore. I never stopped loving her, he told me, his voice soft and full of guilt, the moment he admitted his choice. And that's when I realized I was never the one. I was a distraction, a replacement for a past he couldn't shake, a convenient choice until his old flame came crawling back. The truth crashed into me like a wave, pulling me under. The anger, the betrayal, it burned through my veins faster than I could process. I had given him my all, my trust, my heart, and this is how it ended. He didn't even fight for me. "I'm sorry," he said, his words like daggers to my chest. "She's been through so much, and I can't turn my back on her now." I heard him, but it didn't sink in right away. I couldn't make sense of it. How could someone so clearly in love with me just turn it off for someone else? The tears started to fall, but I didn't care to wipe them away. I wasn't angry at him, no. I was angry at myself for not seeing this sooner. I had been so blind. I can't stay here. I couldn't be in this house anymore. I couldn't look at his things, the reminders of a life I had thought we'd build together. The pictures we took. The plans we made. All of it shattered in a second. I grabbed my bag and walked out the door, leaving him behind without another word. I didn't need to hear his excuses anymore. I didn't need him to justify his actions or beg me to understand. I was done. The streets were empty as I walked, my thoughts racing faster than my feet could carry me. It didn't matter where I was going. I had to get out of there. Away from the place that had once felt like home but now felt like a prison. It was over. And then it hit me, the realization. I was free. It was strange to feel relief, even though the pain was still raw. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't bound by his love, by his promises, by his words. I was free to be my own person again. But the more I thought about it, the more something else boiled inside me. The rage. The fury. How dare he do this to me? He thought he could just walk away and leave me in the dust, thinking I was just some passing distraction. He thought he could replace me with her like I didn't matter at all. But he was wrong. I had loved him, trusted him, given him everything. And now I would make him regret it. I knew the decision I had to make. I knew I couldn't stay in this place, in this life that he had torn apart. But I couldn't just let him go either. No, he had to pay. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about reclaiming myself, about taking back control, about making sure he paid for everything he had done. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not this time. I would disappear, yes, but I would come back for him. And when I did, he would realize exactly what he had lost. I had no destination in mind as I walked, the city lights blurring in front of me like the tears I had forced myself not to shed. My mind was a mess, swirling with thoughts of him, her, and what my life had become in an instant. How had it all gone so wrong? I had thought we were building something real, something solid, and yet here I was alone, betrayed, and discarded like an old photograph he no longer cared for. I was done. I had made the decision to disappear. Not just from him, but from everything. From the life that had been full of promises and lies. It was dark when I finally arrived at the small apartment I had rented. No one knew where I was. I had made sure of that. No one could find me. I had burned my bridges, walked away from my friends, my family. Anything that could tether me to that version of myself. The girl who had loved too deeply, trusted too easily, and had believed in the false promises of a man who never truly loved her. I left her behind, locked her away somewhere deep inside me. I needed to be someone else. The first few days were a blur. I didn't want to think about the past. I didn't want to think about the life I had walked away from, or the man who had betrayed me. Instead, I focused on the present, on survival, on the small steps that would lead me to something better. I got a job at a local cafe, simple, low-key. Just the kind of thing I needed to fade into the background. I kept my head down, my interactions brief, and my life as anonymous as possible. But as the days stretched into weeks, I realized something. I was not healed. I had hoped that leaving it all behind would be enough, that I could start fresh, free from the weight of my past. But the truth was, I couldn't escape him. His face was everywhere. His image, the memories of us, the way he used to look at me. The lies he whispered into my ear, pretending to be the man I thought I had known. Every time I closed my eyes, his words echoed in my head. I never stopped loving her. I thought I had left him behind, but in a way he was still inside me. But something had changed. The pain of it all, the anger, the frustration, it was still there, but now it had become fuel. It was pushing me to do something more than just survive. I couldn't keep running from what he had done to me. I needed to make him pay. But how? The first time I saw him again, I almost didn't recognize him. It was a chance encounter, a coincidence, or so it seemed at the time. I was leaving work, my head down, when I heard the sound of his voice. That familiar, deep voice that used to make my heart race. Tina. I froze in my tracks. I didn't want to turn around, didn't want to see him. But my body betrayed me, and I slowly spun on my heel to face him. There he was, standing in front of me, as if nothing had changed. His hair was a little longer, his clothes more casual, but his eyes, those eyes were still the same. Warm. Soft. Deceptive. "Hey," he said, his voice soft with surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here." I forced a smile, pretending to be calm, pretending I was fine. I could say the same. He took a step closer, his eyes searching mine, as if trying to find the girl he had once known. "You've been gone for so long. I've been worried about you." I felt the old wound twist inside me, but I didn't let it show. I wasn't that same girl anymore. I had been broken, but I had healed myself. I had made sure of it. "I'm fine," I said, my voice cool. "I'm living my life." He looked taken aback, as though that simple answer didn't fit the narrative he had in his head. I wanted to check in. See if you were okay. You chose her, remember?" I snapped before I could stop myself. The words were out before I could hold them back. "You chose her over me. Why would you care now?" The look of guilt that crossed his face was fleeting, but it was enough to make my heart burn. He didn't have the right to feel guilty. Not after what he had done. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said quietly, the words almost too soft to hear. "You have to know that." I almost laughed. "Hurt me? Then why didn't you fight for me?" I shot back, my voice louder now. "Why didn't you fight for us?" His silence spoke volumes, and it made everything clear. He had chosen her. And I was just a convenience, someone to pass the time until the past resurfaced. "You don't get to come here and pretend like everything's okay," I continued, my voice shaking with anger. "You don't get to say you care, not after everything you did to me. Not after everything you took." He reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away, my eyes glaring at him. "I made a mistake," he said, his voice almost pleading. "I know I hurt you, but I never stopped loving you, Tina. Please just give me a chance to explain." I looked at him for a long moment, the words hanging between us, but all I could think about was the pain. The years of my life I had spent believing his lies, trusting him. And in the end, I had nothing to show for it. "No," I said coldly, turning away. "You don't get that chance. Not anymore." The moment I left him standing there, I felt a rush of power. The first real sense of control I had felt in so long. He had no idea that I wasn't just walking away. I wasn't leaving him behind. I was letting him believe he could still have a place in my life, while in reality I was planning my next move. I had just seen him, heard his words, and the emotions that had plagued me for so long were slowly starting to shift. I was no longer the girl who loved him. I was the girl who had been betrayed, and now I was the one pulling the strings. But what had hurt me the most, what had broken me down over the past few weeks, was that I had allowed him to come back into my life even after everything. I had let him keep me on a leash, pulling me back in whenever he felt like it. I had been weak. Not anymore. The first thing I did after the encounter was cut all ties completely. No more texts, no more calls. I deleted him from everything, my phone, my social media. It felt strange at first, not having him around, but as the days passed, the strange emptiness started to feel less like loss and more like freedom. But the game had only begun. He thought he could manipulate me again, think he could come in and apologize his way back into my life. Well, I was done letting him have control. This time, I was going to make him feel the weight of his betrayal. This time, I wasn't going to let him off the hook so easily. I needed to know more about her, about him, about the entire situation. I began to watch him more closely. I knew he would reach out again. I knew he couldn't stay away. He couldn't stand the thought of losing me forever. And so, while I kept my distance, I made sure I was watching from the shadows. I learned his routines, what time he woke up, when he went to work, what he did in his free time. Nothing was a coincidence. Everything was part of my plan. The first piece of the puzzle came when I noticed something strange on his social media account. It was a picture of him and his ex, standing close together at a charity event. His ex looked sick, her fragile appearance almost convincing him to play the hero once again. But as I studied the photo closely, I noticed something that sent a chill through my veins. There was a picture of the two of them, a picture from years ago. A moment I knew wasn't real. It didn't make sense. Why would they post this picture now? What were they trying to prove? And just like that, it hit me, he was playing me again. I started digging deeper into their past. I knew that she was part of the reason he had hurt me. But what I didn't know was just how deep their connection went. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. She had always been a shadow in the background, pulling strings from afar while pretending to be the victim. She wasn't just sick. She was manipulative. I spent hours tracking her movements, looking for any slip-up, any weakness I could use against her. I found that she had been reaching out to people from his past, trying to pull them back into his life, trying to manipulate them into feeling pity for her, and by extension, him. I also found out something that I hadn't expected. She had known about me all along. The more I learned, the angrier I became. They had been playing this game for years, with me as the unwitting pawn. It was time for me to take control of the board. It was time to make them both pay. The first thing I did was reach out to the one person who could help me get closer to my goal. His old friend Matt. Matt had been there from the beginning, watching the entire relationship unfold. He had seen me at my most vulnerable, and though I didn't expect him to want to help me now, I knew that if I could get him to see the truth, he would. He had always been someone who couldn't stand manipulation. I met him for coffee, and after some casual pleasantries, I hit him with the question I had been planning to ask. "Do you know anything about my ex and his sick ex?" I asked casually. What happened between them? Matt looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. "You really want to know?" he asked quietly. "More than anything," I said, my voice steady but firm. Matt leaned in, lowering his voice. It wasn't just love. It was always control. They fed off each other's drama, their need to be needed. And he's always gone back to her every time things got serious with someone else. He needed to feel like a hero to her, like she was his responsibility. I swallowed hard. So much of it made sense now. I had been the one to blame, thinking he was the victim, thinking he was trying to do the right thing. But all along, he was just trying to be her hero. I clenched my fists under the table, my nails digging into my palms. He had never loved me. He had only needed me to feel good about himself. And I had fallen for it every single time. I couldn't let him get away with it. I couldn't let him get away with using me again, thinking I was just another chapter in his story of manipulation. The plan was forming in my head, slowly but surely. I needed to hit them both where it would hurt the most. Their reputation. The last thing they would ever expect was for me to expose them in front of everyone who had once respected them. I would tear down their lies, make them face the truth. But first, I had to set things in motion in secret. I started by gathering every piece of information I could. Pictures, old messages, anything that could expose their secrets. I needed everything to be undeniable. I was going to ruin them. But this time it wasn't just about getting revenge. It was about making sure they could never hurt anyone again. The moment I decided to expose them, truly expose them, I knew there would be no turning back. This wasn't just about my revenge anymore. This was about control. about power, about taking everything they had worked for and shoving it back in their faces. But it wasn't going to be easy. These people had spent years perfecting their lies, covering their tracks, and manipulating everyone around them. They were good at it. Too good. But I had something they didn't, the truth. And truth, as it turns out, was a weapon far more powerful than any lie they could spin. I had the information I needed. Now it was time to pull the trigger. But how? How do you bring down two people who have made their lives all about deception and control? How do you make sure their world collapses in on itself? I had a plan, and it started with one simple rule. No one can be trusted. I began with his friends. The people who had once respected him, who had once been his closest allies, were now the perfect pawns in my game. I reached out to a few of them, pretending to be the same naive girl he had used before. I knew exactly what to say to get them talking. I knew how to make them think I was still desperate for his approval, still clinging to the idea that everything could go back to normal. I fed them lies, told them I was struggling to get over the breakup, that I missed him. They bought it just like I had. And just like that, I began to plant the seeds of doubt. "He's not the man you think he is," I said to one of his closest friends, keeping my voice soft, full of vulnerability. "I know he's not perfect, but he's the only one who's ever truly cared for me. And now I feel like I've lost him to her. Again." The friend's response was exactly what I wanted. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea, but that hesitation spoke volumes. He was questioning his loyalty to him. I continued the game a little more forcefully now. I fed more whispers, more doubts. I carefully crafted stories about the ways he had treated me, how he had lied to everyone to make them feel sorry for him. I made sure each word hit just the right target. And it worked. Slowly, I saw the cracks beginning to form in his social circle, his network of friends. The people who had once thought the world of him were starting to see his true face. The man who had used and manipulated everyone around him. Then came the second phase, the ex. I needed to get to her. She was the key to everything. He had gone back to her time and time again, using her as an excuse to keep me on a string. She had always been the one he could rely on when things got too real with me. I had always known deep down that she was never truly out of the picture, no matter how much he tried to convince me otherwise. And now I was going to use her weakness against her. The ex was a master manipulator in her own right, but like everyone else, she had her vulnerabilities. She had been playing the sick, helpless victim for so long, using her illness to get him back every time. And I knew that her reliance on him was her greatest flaw. She thought he could save her, that he was her knight in shining armor. But the truth was, he didn't care about her like she thought he did. I knew exactly what to do. I planted rumors, made sure the right people heard them. I started suggesting, just subtly, that she was using him for her own needs, for her own benefit. I made it seem like she was keeping him around because of her illness, and that when she didn't need him anymore, she would cast him aside just as quickly. The beauty of this was that I didn't have to expose her to him directly. He already knew she was using him, but I just had to push him far enough to make him doubt her. And once he began questioning her, everything else would fall into place. The real moment of power came when I revealed the final blow. A message. I had been saving this one. A series of messages between them, the ones that would expose the truth. Their secret meetings, the manipulations, the lies they had told to keep me in the dark. I waited for the right moment, an opportunity when they were both vulnerable, when the pieces were all lined up perfectly. And then I sent it. The messages weren't long. In fact, they were simple. But the impact was devastating. I made sure that he received them at a time when he would be alone, when he would have no one else to turn to. "I know everything," the message started. "She's been playing you for a fool. You've always been her backup, and you always will be. You've been nothing but a toy for her, just like you were for me." It was the truth. The ugly truth that he couldn't ignore. I watched as everything fell apart. His face when he saw the message, the disbelief, the horror, the realization that everything he had been telling himself was a lie was priceless. He couldn't pretend anymore. There were no more excuses. His perfect world, the one he had carefully constructed around his manipulations, had cracked. And I was standing there watching it all burn. The moment I saw him, I knew. He had broken. There was no pretending anymore, no false smiles, no charming words to smooth things over. He wasn't the confident, cocky man who had once held all the power. Now he was just a shell of that person, desperate and completely exposed. The carefully constructed mask he had worn for so long had shattered, and beneath it, there was nothing but fear and guilt. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel anything except a cold satisfaction. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when he saw the full extent of the destruction he had caused. He stood in front of me, his eyes wide with panic, his voice trembling. "Tina, please, you have to believe me. It's not what you think. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to laugh. Didn't mean for it to go this far? After everything? After how many times he had lied to me, used me and betrayed me? And now he thought a few words of apology would fix it? I crossed my arms, looking him over with disdain. "Don't even try. You chose her. You never cared about me. I was just your backup. And now that I'm not playing the part you wanted, you're scrambling, trying to fix the mess you made." His expression flickered, hurt, confusion, and something else. Was it regret? Was he realizing he had lost everything for someone who didn't even love him back? "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice almost pleading. "I didn't know what I was doing. But now, I know I've lost you and I regret it. I really do." I wanted to slap the words right out of his mouth. The audacity. The manipulation. He thought he could just apologize and have everything fall back into place. But I wasn't the same girl anymore. "I'm not interested in your regrets," I snapped. "I'm done. We're done. You don't get to come in and out of my life whenever you please. You don't get to manipulate me anymore." His face crumpled and he stepped forward. "Please. I'll fix this. I'll make it right. We can go back to the way things were, Tina. I'll make sure nothing like this ever happens again." But I wasn't listening anymore. He was just words. Empty words. I had heard them too many times, and this time they meant nothing. "You had your chance," I said, turning away. "And you chose her." The next few days were a blur of chaotic emotions. I had exposed his lies, his manipulation, and yet the truth still didn't feel like enough. There was a part of me that had wanted him to feel the pain I had gone through. To see him broken, begging would have been sweet, but it wasn't enough. I wanted more. I wanted him to lose everything he had. So I set my sights on the only thing that mattered now, his career. I knew how important his image was to him, how much he relied on the people who worshipped him, the people who believed his lies. But I had something that could bring it all down. A single phone call, a single piece of information, and his world would crumble. I made the call. "Hi, I have some information about your client," I said, my voice steady, calm. "It seems his past might not be as clean as he claims. I'd suggest you do a bit of digging into his finances and his personal life." I could hear the lawyer's surprise at the other end of the line, the shifting of papers. I didn't care. All I cared about was watching everything he built burn to the ground. He had hurt me. Now I was making sure he would never hurt anyone again. But my revenge didn't stop there. No, she had to pay too. The ex. The one who thought she could just waltz back into his life and take everything away from me. She was just as much of a player in this game as he was, and I wasn't going to let her slip by unscathed. I had been studying her moves, watching her carefully, and I knew her weaknesses. I had learned everything about her, from her friends to her vulnerabilities, to the way she used her sickness to control him. I made sure that the information I had about her reached the right people. I made sure her dirty little secrets were exposed. She wasn't the innocent, sick woman she pretended to be. She was just another manipulative player in this game, and I was done being the victim. The final piece of my plan fell into place when I finally faced them both. This time I didn't need to say a word. I didn't need to plead for them to understand what they had done. They were already facing the consequences. I watched as his empire of lies began to crumble. His friends started turning on him. His investors pulled their support. The news outlets picked up the story about his financial misconduct, and I smiled as I saw the headlines. The ex was no different. I made sure that every whisper about her manipulations, every secret she had buried, was brought to light. Her reputation, her carefully crafted image, was destroyed in a matter of days. And as they stood there, both of them stripped of everything they had, I realized something. I had won. Not just because they were destroyed, but because I was free. It was over. Or at least that's what I thought. His empire had crumbled. His reputation, once flawless, now lay in tatters. The money, the power, the status, all gone, wiped away like it never existed. I had done what I set out to do. I had taken everything from him and his ex. They were broken, humiliated, and defeated. For the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of peace. It was as if the weight I had carried for so long had finally lifted from my chest. But as I sat there watching everything I had orchestrated unfold, a nagging feeling began to stir inside me. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't regret. It was something darker, something I couldn't quite place. I had worked so hard to bring them down. I had planned every step, made sure every move was calculated, and executed it flawlessly. But as I saw them both disappear into the shadows, I realized something. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Sure, the revenge had been sweet. Watching his world fall apart had been everything I dreamed of. But now that it was over, the silence felt hollow. I tried to push the feeling away. I was stronger now, I told myself. I had taken control of my life, and nothing would ever feel as bad as it had before. I had faced them both, made them pay, and walked away with my dignity intact. But what about the future? It was late one evening when the call came. I had just finished dinner, sitting alone in my apartment, when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen froze me in place. It wasn't him. It wasn't her. It wasn't even anyone I expected. It was Matt. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. He had been there at the beginning, my ally, my confidant. But after everything had fallen apart, I had distanced myself. I had wanted to let the dust settle and focus on rebuilding my life, on moving on. But now he was calling. I answered the phone, trying to keep my voice steady. Matt. His voice was low, urgent. Tina, we need to talk. I frowned, feeling a sharp unease. What is it? I think you need to listen to me, he said. I know you think it's over, but I've uncovered something. Something you need to know. I sat up straighter, my heart racing. What do you mean? What's going on? Matt took a deep breath. I've been looking into your ex, his ex, and everything that's been going on. There's something you don't know. Something I didn't want to believe, but I have to tell you now. It's about your family. My stomach dropped. What about my family? I heard him hesitate, and for a moment, I wondered if he was second-guessing himself. But then he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Your ex. He didn't just manipulate you. He's been working with someone else all along. Someone you never suspected. I felt the blood drain from my face. Who? He paused before answering. I don't know yet. But whoever it is, they've been watching you, Tina. They've been pulling the strings. I stood there, completely frozen as his words sank in. It wasn't over. I had thought that destroying him, destroying her, was the end. I had believed that when I walked away I was free. But now I realized I had been played. All of it, the pain, the manipulation, the game, it had never been just about them. There was someone else. Someone I had never even considered. And they had been orchestrating everything from the start. I needed answers. The next day I reached out to Matt again. This time I demanded more details. I needed to know exactly what he had uncovered. What else do you know? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. I've been digging into your ex's old business dealings, and I found something that connects back to your family. Not just him and his ex, but someone in your family has been involved. I think they've been pulling the strings from the start. I know this sounds crazy, but I'm telling you. There's someone in your family working against you. I felt the world tilt beneath me. My own family? How could that be possible? But as I began to think about it, it made sense. The manipulation, the betrayal, the things I had never understood, the way everything had always seemed just out of reach. Maybe it wasn't him after all. Maybe it was someone closer to home. I thought of my parents, my siblings, the people who had always been there. Could they really have been part of this all along? Were they as complicit as he was? I didn't have the answers yet. But I was going to find out. With every step I took, every piece of information I uncovered, I realized that my life was still being manipulated, even after everything I had done to escape. The past was never truly finished. But I was done running. I was going to take back control of my life once and for all. And this time I wouldn't just destroy my enemies, I would destroy the very foundation they built their lies on. If my family was involved, then they, too, would have to face the consequences. The pieces were finally falling into place. After weeks of digging, questioning, and uncovering, I knew exactly what I had to do. The betrayal ran deeper than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just him. It wasn't just her. It was my own flesh and blood. I had always believed in the family bond, the one thing I thought would never betray me. But the truth was staring me in the face now, clearer than ever. I had been living a lie. The betrayal was orchestrated by someone I had trusted most. Someone I never thought would hurt me. My own brother. The shock hit me like a ton of bricks, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. He was the last person I would have suspected. But there it was. The subtle signs, the hints of manipulation, the hidden meetings, and the unexplained money transfers, all led back to him. I sat in my car, staring at the front door of my family's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I had always told myself that if I ever found out who had betrayed me, I would confront them without hesitation. But now that I knew, the uncertainty crept in. Could I really face him? Could I confront the person who had torn my world apart, who had been feeding information to my ex, pulling the strings from behind the scenes? But I couldn't wait any longer. I had come too far, learned too much. It was time. I walked through the door, my heart pounding in my chest. He was sitting in the living room, scrolling through his phone, looking completely normal. He looked up when I entered, his face lighting up with a smile. "Hey sis, how've you been?" It made me sick. How could he act so casual when I knew what he had done? "Cut the act," I said, my voice steady but full of fire. "I know everything. I know it was you. You've been helping him all along." His face froze and the smile quickly faded. He put down his phone and stood up, his expression hardening. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "I know about the money transfers, the meetings, the information you've been feeding him. You've been working with him from the start. You helped him destroy me." He took a step back, and I saw the panic flash in his eyes for just a second before he regained his composure. "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, stepping closer. "You used me. You let him manipulate me. You ruined my life for what? Money. Power. Because you thought you could control me." He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" I scoffed. "You didn't protect me, you destroyed me. You destroyed this family. And you did it for him. For a man who didn't even care about me. You sold me out for your own gain." He stood there, silent, unable to respond. It was clear now. His guilt, his fear, they were written all over his face. He had done exactly what I accused him of. And now he couldn't deny it. I took a deep breath, my anger boiling over. "You know what? I'm done. I don't care why you did it anymore. The damage is done. You and him both made me believe that my world was perfect, and all along you were tearing it down from the inside. I trusted you. I never meant for it to go this far," he muttered. "It's too late for that." I cut him off. "I'm not the same person anymore. I'm not the naive girl you could control. You and him both took everything from me. But now I'm taking it all back. I'm going to make sure you never get away with this." I could see the realization hit him. The fear. The guilt. The understanding that the game was over. "You're not going to get away with this," he said, his voice trembling. "You don't understand what you're doing." I looked him dead in the eye, my voice cold. "Oh, I understand perfectly. And when this is all over, you'll understand too. I'm going to make sure you pay for what you've done to me. And to this family. You'll lose everything. You'll see what it feels like to be left with nothing." I turned on my heel, my heart pounding as I walked out the door. I didn't look back. I had done it. I had exposed the truth. I had torn down the walls he had built around himself, and now there was nothing left but the wreckage of his lies. But as I stepped into my car and started the engine, I felt a strange emptiness inside me. I had taken my revenge. But was that really enough? Had I truly won? Or had I just become the same person I had sworn never to be, the one who sought destruction without considering the cost? I didn't know the answer yet. All I knew was that my journey wasn't over. I thought it was over. I had exposed the lies. I had taken down the people who had torn my world apart. I had destroyed the facade they had carefully built, watching as everything they had worked for crumbled in front of them. The guilt had eaten away at my brother's soul. The ex had been completely humiliated, and the truth was out in the open for everyone to see. I had won, and yet there was still something inside me that felt incomplete. I had set out for revenge and I had gotten what I wanted, but as I sat there, alone in my apartment, staring at the wreckage of their lives, I couldn't help but wonder. Had I lost a part of myself along the way? I had spent so much time focusing on what they had taken from me, on the betrayal that had broken me, that I had forgotten one crucial thing: the cost of my own actions. I was no longer the person I had once been. The girl who loved too easily, who trusted blindly, who believed that love could fix everything. I had become someone else, someone colder, someone who saw the world through a lens of calculation and revenge. And now, as I looked at my reflection, I wondered if I had sacrificed something precious in the process. But I couldn't dwell on that now. I was sitting in the kitchen sipping on my coffee when I heard the knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't been expecting anything really ever since I cut ties with everyone from my old life. But somehow I knew who it was. It was him. I hadn't seen him in days, and I had told myself I was done with him. I had walked away, left him in the dust, and yet, here he was standing at my door as if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't chosen her. As if he hadn't destroyed everything. I didn't answer at first. I just stared at the door, my fingers tightening around my mug. My heart started to race, but I wasn't going to let it control me. I had already made up my mind about him. He wasn't worth my time, my energy, my emotions. He had already taken so much from me. He wasn't going to take any more. But then I heard his voice again, soft, almost pleading. "Tina, please. Open the door." I could feel the walls I had built around myself starting to crack. No, I couldn't. But something in his voice, that familiar vulnerability, made me hesitate. Could it be real? Was he truly sorry? Or was this just another manipulation, another attempt to pull me back into his web? I had already walked away once. I had to stay strong. I opened the door. There he was, standing there looking almost broken. His hair was messier than usual, his eyes darker, and his posture was hunched, like the weight of his guilt was crushing him. It almost made me feel sorry for him. But I knew better. "Why are you here?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, hiding the emotions that were still swirling inside me. He took a deep breath before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "I messed up. I messed up so badly, Tina." I crossed my arms, standing firm. "Yeah, you did. I've been thinking about everything, about what you said, about what happened," he continued, his voice thick with regret. "I chose her over you, and I'm sorry. I was stupid. But Tina, I never stopped loving you. I still." "Stop." I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. "You don't get to say that. Not after everything. I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, taking a step closer. "But I need you to know that I'm not the person I was. I don't want her anymore. I want you. I always wanted you." My stomach churned at his words. I had heard them before, in another lifetime, in another version of me. The same lies, the same promises. But this time I saw through it. This time I was no longer the fool. "I don't need your words," I said, my voice steady, cold. "You had your chance. You made your choice. And you chose her. Don't come here asking for forgiveness. Don't come here pretending like you can fix what you broke. You can't." He stood there, frozen, looking at me like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. But I didn't care anymore. I had done the work. I had fought for myself, and I had finally freed myself from the chains he had wrapped around me. "You never loved me," I said, my voice almost a whisper. "You used me. And now you're just trying to pick up the pieces of your broken life. But I'm not a part of it anymore." He reached out, his hand trembling. "Tina, please." I stepped back, away from him. "No. Goodbye." As I closed the door, I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel relief. I felt peace. I had taken my revenge. I had exposed him for who he was, made him feel the consequences of his choices. But now I realized it was time to stop playing games. It was time to move on. The man I had loved was nothing but a memory, a shadow in my past. And that's where he belonged.